welcome back for another episode of the CBSI Hot 10 show. Make sure you go over to comicbookinvest.com and check out the article where I may add a few extra tidbits and details that I don't cover here on the show tonight. And while you're at it, please check out all the content we do have here on the channel. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Make sure that you like, you subscribe, and you hit that alert button so you don't miss anything. Keep telling your friends so we can keep growing this channel. And sorry this is coming a little bit late this week, but it's been kind of a busy day for me sports-wise as I'm trying to get this done as the Sixers are losing right now at halftime in a playoff game against the Celtics while the NFL draft is rolling on and my Jets just made their second-round pick after trading down when I was hoping to actually get this done earlier when they originally had their pick. But we had to wait. So sorry for the little bit of a delay. Hopefully you don't mind too much. And if you just want to see this week's list, don't worry, I got you covered. I'll be starting it up right after this short little break. All right, we are going to start off the show with those books that just missed the cut and didn't quite make the list. First up, even though we got a teaser trailer that actually looks kind of interesting, if you ask me, animated-wise, Duncan Jones, who very underrated for what he did with that Warcraft movie. I wish we would have gotten more of that, as I'm not a big Warcraft player, but I really did enjoy that flick that he put together, and I think he's going to do a good job with Rogue Trooper once it's finally released. So we got a teaser for this Rogue Trooper film. I don't know much about it. I know it is a UK property, very popular across the pond, and we'll see what Duncan can do with this. I'm looking forward to seeing. That's been talked about for a while, so we'll see what happens with this. However, book sales haven't really translated as yet, even though we just got a teaser trailer, and that has spiked many another book here and there on the list the last few weeks. It's been slow to adopt Rogue Trooper #1 here in the marketplace, which is kind of surprising. So we'll see if it gathers any more steam over the weeks ahead. But for now, yeah, kind of slow going to start here with about a dozen sales. Raw's only hitting about $10, which isn't all that high. It's kind of been there. You can find cheap copies here and there. And 9.6s of CGC are $70 to $90. So a couple of those sold. Again, not big prices. Granted, it's a 9.6, not a 9.8, but still. Again, the market's kind of slow to adopt investing in this one. So we'll see if anything more comes from this. So this one missed the cut with not quite enough volume, not quite enough of a bump in price. So we'll take a look at another book that, again, usually news and announcements of casting cause a bit more of a stir here, as you know, Sir Tywin Lannister has been cast as Harvey Dent's dad. So the first appearance of Harvey Dent's dad in comics is in Batman Annual number 14. I know it's going to be a minor role in the next Batman film and not like a huge deal, but even so, things like this have spiked books before. That said, it spiked it a bit. Last week, one sold for $5. This week, there were about 15 sales thereabouts, so that increase in volume was huge, and I thought about it, but it's still maxed out at 15, and most of them have been cheap. Again, the high was $10. Most sold in like that kind of $3, $4 kind of range. So it just wasn't enough of a bump, in my opinion, to make the cut when you see the rest of the books that did actually make it for this week. So this one was worth noting, is worth looking at, following that news and that announcement, but not quite enough traction yet. Will we get more? Maybe. But for now, this one just missed the cut as well. Now, before we get to the actual list, I want to remind that you can get 10% off your entire order over at BCW to get your supplies, your bags, your boards, your long boxes and short boxes, all that stuff you hate having to pay money for, but you got to do it anyway to keep your comics and collectibles safe. So you got to spend it. You might as well save some money while you do it and use my code RENA10 for 10% off your entire order. You help out the channel, you get yourself a discount, 10% off. And now we can get to the Hot 10 with our first book.
Number 10.
I actually missed this book when I did my Wednesday watch list rundown of the books coming out this week, as this is the Will Jack 1 in 15 incentive for the new Vampirella #1. Yes, it's a Dynamite book. Dynamite, so many different covers. This one just got lost in the sauce, and I didn't realize that this 1 in 15 wasn't just, I thought my eyeballs just saw the Virgin Perillo 1 in 20, and I just passed over this thinking it was another variation of that same cover, not realizing this was a separate cover by Will Jack in a 1 in 15. it didn't miss it, as plenty of people have. It is a Virgin cover, very nice. Most of these Will Jack covers of late have been store exclusives from him directly, and they have done quite well. A lot of pop kills, etc., and vampies too. But here we have it from Dynamite, 1 in 15 incentive, with about a dozen sold, well above ratio here, averaging $26. Highs hitting as much as $40 already. Again, not a ton of volume, but enough for an incentive variant that it was worth earning a spot here, albeit at the bottom of the list and outpacing those other books that we just talked about, missing the cut with similar volumes. So with that, this was our number 10 book, which will take us to our next one.
Number 9.
Another month, another Exquisite Corpse issue, another thank you edition. This is rinse and repeat. We've seen this many, many times before, and here we have, as we near the end, we're nearing the end. This is issue 12. I think we got one more to go before this story arc is completed, but it's issue 12 out this week with a thank you edition. Once again, foil, one per store / one per account, doing pretty well. So at first, I thought it didn't have a lot of traction. And then when I reran the numbers, I did see that this issue 12 did have over a dozen sold. I think there was about 14 or 15 or so that I think I counted up, averaging $50, more so than normal, pretty or more on the high end for these thank yous, with highs reaching as much as $75 as we near the close. So I thought those numbers were enough to earn itself a spot here at number 9, albeit again with under 20 sales. I generally don't have the lower volumes making the cuts, but for incentives, I have to kind of weigh it differently, or one per store / one per accounts, because again, the volume is not quite the same. Like the copies available, it's not apples to apples. So with that all said, this was our number 9 book for the week, which will take us to our next one here at number
8.
And this is our first drop of the week. So last week, I think this was closer to, what was it, like 5 or 6 thereabouts? But Devil's Reign, this spoiler cover featuring Luke Cage running for mayor. Speculation still running that this will be a storyline coming up in the next season of Daredevil Born Again, with more and more teases. But this has fallen a little bit down the list, despite the fact that prices are up. Remember, last week when we had this here, this was a dollar bin book that basically got itself averaging back to cover. So now it's averaging a little bit above cover with a 40% increase in that price, up to about $7 overall. But now highs are hitting $26, which is a big jump from last week's high. Yes, the volume's down a little bit with only 35 plus sold, but not down too much. And considering with higher prices, as most of these are now selling for a premium and above cover, this one's still trending upwards for now. Will that continue? Don't know. We'll see. We'll see if this storyline actually comes to fruition once we get more news on the next season of Daredevil Born Again. But for now, a lot of speculation for this book and a pretty cool spoiler cover by Dan Panosian. So that was our number 8 book. So let's get to lucky number 7.
Number 7.
A lot of traction this week for Lost Fantasy. I think with it coming back with that number 9, new storyline, new story arc, in conjunction with the release of Fireborn, which was a tie-in book, Lost Fantasy is getting a lot of talk, and a lot of people are realizing this is a solid read and going back and picking this one up. So here we have the very first issue, giant size issue 1 of Lost Fantasy. It's been trending upwards with a chunk of sales here. So here we go. This is the cover A. There are pair of cover, open order covers on this. And then we have some incentives. I'm not going to get into all the incentives on this one, but these are the 2 open order covers with this first cover done by Luca. And then we do have this homage cover with the PlayStation look and, the Final Fantasy vibes here, especially with the giant sword. 50 plus sold for issue 1 of Lost Fantasy. Much like some of the more recent books where this was less than cover. This was a cheap discount type book. Now it's trending above cover, up 60% in the average price, up at $7, which I get it. $7 doesn't seem like all that much, but considering, once again, this thing was selling for less than cover last week at like $3 or $4, and this is a $4.99 cover, that is an interesting jump in price, with highs hitting $10 already. Not saying it's going to keep going that way or it's not going to keep going that way. We'll see how this keeps trending, but for now, it's on the uptick, and it is getting harder and harder to find as people are buying lots, they're buying the incentives, they're buying anything they can with these Lost Fantasy books, including the later printings for this book, as well as we do have the second print for this featuring that sort of kind of classic gaming look on the PlayStation, PlayStation games, the greatest hits. I think it's a nice little touch here on the later printing, because those games are also kind of like later prints for video games. This is averaging $13, and as I mentioned, 68% of all these sales are now been at a premium, so the cheap copies cleared out. The copies are now selling for that premium price, which is, once again, I'm clarifying it as $1 above cover. So $6 or more, which is how that overall average finally got pulled up to $7, because last week the average, like I said, was only $4. And that I had to round up to get to $4 anyway. But that said, this is the second print, and there is actually a third printing as well, but that one has the greatest hits along the side, and the third print bit is much smaller text, but very similar, very cool look, if you ask me. So there is Lost Fantasy #1 as our lucky #7 book, which will take us to our next one to round out the first half of the top 10.
Number 6.
This week, we also got a Clayface trailer. Body horror, very creepy, has me interested. When I initially heard that they were going to make a Clayface movie, I didn't care. I had no interest whatsoever. After seeing the trailer, I will admit I am curious what they're going to do here. I think it could be very interesting, especially with the effects and the little bits that they've teased so far in the little bit of a teaser that we got, that I think this could be an interesting little tie-in to the DC universe and Batman as a whole. But with that, we see a classic gem here moving up. Detective Comics, the first appearance of Clayface, going back a ways here. This 12 center is starting to see some movement. And how much movement are we seeing on issue number 298? Not a ton, but kind of like we've looked at a lot of these bigger books, the volumes, it's different. It's not an apples to apples comparison. We're talking about new releases when we're talking about heavier priced books like this. So the fact that we're seeing volumes getting over about 10 sales, which again doesn't seem like a lot, but considering that's 167% increase in volume, because last week I think there were 3 sales, if that. So you go from basically no sales to it selling thanks to the trailer, and prices going up as the average for these raw copies, mind you, and lower grade raw copies averaging $484, up almost $100. That is where that trend is really making itself known. As you can see here, much more volume, even though volumes are low overall, but it's a classic book. It's a harder to find book. There's not tons of these out there. And the prices being paid going up, as the raw high this week was $595. Just keep that in mind as well. The big sale of the week for this book was a 5.0. Once again, a mid-lower grade there. 5.0 sold for $826. And that average could have been much, much higher, but there were 2 coverless copies that sold, and they sold for $30 and $70 for coverless copies of this classic issue. So once again, it's not always an apples-to-apples comparison, but you see people are willing to spend more for this book, and more people are spending more for this book, which is why it's trending in that upwards direction and why it is here at number 6, thanks to that jump in volume and those jumps in price. And thanks to that trailer, getting people reminded that this will be coming our way this fall. So with that, we still have the top of the list to go. So let's see what the top half has to offer.
Number 5.
Another drop. This one was number 1 last week and has fallen on some harder times here at number 5. But not terrible. Not terrible for Static to be finding its way here, because it is still selling very well, as that news of an adaptation still coming has people still excited and willing to pay for this book. Volumes are up. Even though it fell down the list, volume is up 33% with 40 plus sold. Prices remaining pretty consistent, so that's why I had to level set how far the drop went, because the average is only up $2, but it's still up $2 to $24, where last week it was $22, with the high hitting $50, where last week's high was $40. So we see increases in the average and the high price marks and average in volume, but still level set it as to why it's here, still in the top half, but it had to drop a few spots. Meanwhile, that $50 high was actually for the B cover, the variant blue cover, which is this cover here. And this one also saw a couple of 9.8 sales in the realm of $155 to $175. So keep that into context as well, as I think last week we saw the cover A go from like 100 to 150 for 9/8. And this one's kind of exceeding that a little bit right now, as I don't think there was any blue 9/8 last week that sold. So again, same book, different covers, different prices, but still a lot of interest in this one. So dropping to number 5, but still doing well for itself. And with that, we'll keep the list rolling and check out our next book.
Number 4.
This one was also on our list last week, but this one has climbed up a few spots up to number 4. This is Lost Fantasy number 9. While it does have multiple covers, the drive has been for this particular variant, the D cover here as well, because this is the first work of this newer artist, I want to say Cate Blanchett. But if I'm even saying that, maybe it's pronounced Blanchet or something, and I'm just saying it all wrong. But Lost Fantasy number 9, good looking cover here. I get it, but prices are up. Last week we saw like the start of a trend as a lot of copies sold for cover or less. This week, no. This week we had another 40 sales, but they've all basically sold for premiums as the average is up $15 to $22 on average for this book, with highs up $13 up to $33. So last week this hit $20. This week it's hitting $33, with the average is even above last week's high of $20. Look, the average is above last week's high. So this one kind of jumped up over the past week in price and average, which is why it's here at number 4. And with that, we still have the top 3 to go. So let's take a look now.
Number 3.
Here we go with another classic and related to Daredevil and Daredevil Born Again, as that speculation continues about Elektra returning, and the actress Elodie Young, I believe is her name, with some Instagram posts of her working out, maybe getting in shape, maybe for a return. I've also mentioned the possibility that she could tie in with the Hand in the Spider-Man movie coming this summer, that she could be the female character. I don't know. I'm just guessing, but there is a good chance that she could come back like the other Netflix characters to Daredevil with the next season of Born Again next year. So while a lot of talk and a lot of books were selling for issue 181, which was her death, people kind of realized maybe we should pick up our first appearance, which is Daredevil 168 here, this classic, once again, by Frank Miller. So with that, it has been a pricey book for a while and still is pricey, but that hasn't stopped people from investing, which is why these bits of green showing that rise is why it's here at number 3, with a couple dozen sold, up 43% in volume. So that's a good jump in volume for a book of this nature, averaging overall $313, up 66%, up $66 on average. Again, pretty impressive for a book that sells mostly in like lower grades too. This is another one of those ones that sells in all grades, sells, a lot of times the volume of the sales are in lower grades, but there are the occasional high marks like a 9.8 that sold for $1,600 this week. So to also put that in context, comparing this from this week to last week, with a high sale of $1,600 for a 9.8, last week I believe the high water mark was a 9.6, which was only $405. So four times the price for a 9.8. Granted, we're talking 9.6 to a 9.8, but still, that's a huge increase in what someone was willing to spend on this book. So that's kind of the context of why it's here on the list and up the list this high at number 3. So with that, let's keep it rolling with 2 more books left.
Number 2.
Are you guys tired of Frank Castle yet? I don't think that you are, because he keeps showing up on this list, and we still haven't gotten to his special, which is still, weeks away, coming in May, and then he'll be coming back in the Spider-Man flick. But ASM 129, once again, not only hanging on the list, but climbing up near the top this week with a huge jump in some of these prices. Now, with this said, Amazing Spider-Man 129, we saw, again, another couple dozen sold. Its volume's pretty consistent, but the prices on the copies being sold are up a ton, as the average overall, graded or otherwise, again, because this sells in any grade, raw or graded, average $2,400. That's up $760. I can't even get this right. $765 on average. Last week's average, it's up almost $800. A lot of that has to do with one big sale. But even if you were to take out that huge sale, which I'm going to get to, it's still averaging in that $1,600 range, which is still a ton of money for this book, with the high for a raw up $225, up to $2,000. So over $2,000 for a raw copy of one of these. And that, again, big sale that kind of pulls a lot of this up was a 9.8 that sold for $18,000. So yes, it did do a lot of the work in pulling up that average, but still, even if we take this $18,000 sale out, we still have that raw high going up $200, and we still have that overall average being close to $1,700, which is again an impressive number. So that 18K is also the highest sale for 9.8 since November. I think another 9.8 sold this week as well for like 15 or 16. So keep that in context as well. So huge sale, helping the numbers, but overall, still a lot of money being invested in Frank Castle and this first appearance of the Punisher with ASM 129, which is why it just will not go away. And with that, we still have one book left, and what will be at the top of the mountain this week? Just hang on a second, and we'll see.
And our number one.
I mentioned Lost Fantasy, and here it is at the top of the mountain with issue 5 of the series. Now, why is issue 5 here? Well, this is actually the first appearance of Fireborn, which is the spin-off series from Lost Fantasy that also came out and was released last week. And while Fireborn in and of itself isn't selling at premium prices, it is selling well, and people have enjoyed it, and the buzz is positive for both that series as well as this series as far as readership goes, which is why a lot of folks are going back and picking up these books. And I got to say, I am glad to see comics selling for that reason. That excitement over reading them is driving sales. That is something I miss and wish I could report on more often than not. But with that said, Lost Fantasy number 5 doing quite well. I know I mentioned this one last weekend in Dollar Bin Digging because even though it wasn't a dollar book, I was like, you could still find some out there for cover last week. This week, not so much, as 80 plus sold over the past 7 days. There are multiple covers, and we'll get to that. But the draw has been cover A for the most part. And cover A, this cover I'm showing now, is averaging on its own $27 this week with highs of $29, meaning that's a pretty consistent price. It's been selling just about 25 to 30 bucks basically all week for this particular cover A, which I also find interesting considering at the same time, this cover in black and white is the 1 in 15 incentive, and that is only selling for like 11 bucks. So people aren't really picking up on the incentives yet, but that could soon change. So again, put that all into perspective. Cover A, 27. The 1 in 15 of the same cover art, $11. Granted, neither of them are the character of Fireborn, which is inside the book, but it is interesting to note. Other covers available. Also, we have another Final Fantasy homage here. I think this is Final Fantasy X. But the overall average across all of the covers is still about 13 bucks. So while these other covers are trailing a bit in price, they're starting to come up a bit and not selling above cover, as you can see. And sets with Fireborn 1, so you get the cover A with a Fireborn, are also like $36. Also, for context, considering Fireborn 1 is basically a $5 book, it's a cover price book, still having just been recently released. It's not yet in a premium place, but just for context, that's where that one's moving. And just again, to show you the other cover options, as we have the PlayStation version here, where you also have the Nintendo Switch kind of look, almost Zelda-like with this one. I love these video game type homages. They fit. They fit the series perfectly as well. So well done on their part. And then we do have another cover option here, along with a blank. I think there's a blank, but then here is a new other cover art as well. That's not an homage to any video games or video game covers. So Lost Fantasy, again, a lot of people, positive vibes around this title right now. People going and picking it up. We've had 2 arcs so far, and the 3rd arc just starting with issue 9 recently. So yeah, if you can find it for a decent price, give it a read, because I think it's worth your time. So with that, that is our list for this week. But we are not done yet. Before we get going, I do want to tell you the Fall from Grace, those books that dropped off, the fallout from last week, and also remind you that if you need shipping supplies, you can use my code RENA10, just like at BCW, over at Gemini to get your Gemini mailers. So you can also get bags and boards and short boxes and long boxes there. But mostly, if you got comic books to ship, you're using a Gemini mailer. You hate buying shipping supplies, because who loves buying shipping supplies? So if you got to do it, save money while you do it. Help out the channel, save 10% off. Use, again, my code RENA10, either here or over at BCW. And with that, we can get to this week's Fallout and see which books were high on the list last week that didn't quite make it this week. just so we can kind of go over these books that drop off the list, because they don't go into nowhere. They don't disappear from the market completely and no one's bought a copy ever again. This is what happens sometimes. A book was hot for 1 week and then the next week, maybe not so much. Here's an example. X-Men 101, classic. We've got the Jean Grey, so maybe some of the Jean Grey buzz with Sadie Sink has kind of cooled a bit as we're waiting for more confirmation. So maybe rumor becomes reality. Who knows? But with that said, X-Men 101 is still a classic book. That will never be taken away from this one. However, last week we saw a surge in sales and a surge in price, where this week we saw a dip, which is why it's fallen back into its normal kind of selling kind of range. So we've seen about a dozen sold, with 13 exactly that I counted up. So that's a 48% drop in volume. This is normally where that book is at, and why last week it was a bump. It was a surge. This is normally where it's at, about a dozen. Averaged about $500 overall. That's raw graded. Otherwise, $500, dropping about $100 on the overall average too. So that's why, again, this was on the list last week, because there was that bump in prices and volume. Now it's kind of come back down to earth, and that's why it's fallen off the list. And that's why it's part of this week's fallout. The other one falling on similar times is that first appearance of Bullseye as well. So Daredevil 131, classic book. It made its way with a bump in volume, a bump in price last week, and then this week it's kind of come back down to earth in more of its normal sales, with 15 sold on this one, down 44%. The overall average down $42 to 230, with the high mark being only $189, which is down $215 from last week, where somebody paid $400 for a raw copy. So again, less money being invested in the book overall, which is why it's found itself on the outside looking in here. It's fallen off the list, and I didn't want to just let you wonder what happened to it. It's still out there. It's still a good book. It's still selling. It's just not selling in the prices or the volumes it was last week, which is why it's here. And with that, if you guys have time, please go over and check out the Qualified. They're probably still running live as I've dropped this list. They're doing their quarterly Kickstarter kind of update. So I know it's tough keeping up with all that stuff. So let the boys do it for you. They'll keep you abreast of all the cool Kickstarters you should be taking a look at, as we're seeing more and more artists who are getting their starts, and they're getting, some of these books, very limited edition books, Kickstarter only. They're starting over there. Then they get released. They become hot. They get picked up by the major publishers doing covers here, exclusive or otherwise. And then those original books, those Kickstarter books, start going for some crazy prices. So you can get in on the ground floor, get in early, and listen to what the boys got to say. So with that all said, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for checking out the content we have here, and I will see you all later.